For the 12th time since 1998, Hawaii lawmakers will consider physician aid in dying legislation for the terminally ill. Tonight you will hear strong arguments made for both sides of this debate, currently being heard by our state lawmakers. Will Hawaii become the next state to legalize hastening death when death is inevitable? This live broadcast of Insights on PBS Hawaii starts now.
Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff from Hawaii News Now. 11 times since 1998, Hawaii lawmakers have considered legislation to legalize certain end-of-life options for the terminally ill. Some people believe these options to be immoral, even offensive. Others view them as compassionate and empowering. House Bill 201 is under consideration in Hawaii's current legislative session. It would give terminally ill adults the capacity to request a prescription from their attending physician to facilitate a peaceful death. Tonight, we will hear from both sides of this debate in which even just the choice of words is contentious. Opponents may refer to these options as physician-assisted suicide or euthanasia. Supporters of it may call it aid in dying or death with dignity. We will find out the reasons behind those semantics as well as details about Bill 201 and other proposals, and that's the latest effort in a decades-long fight. We will also look at states where legislation similar to this is now law. And of course, we want to hear from you. We look forward to your participation in tonight's show. You can call, email, or tweet your questions, and you'll find a live stream of this program at pbshawaii.org. Now to our guests. John Radcliffe is a retired union organizer and lobbyist who was diagnosed in 2014 with stage 4 incurable colon cancer that has since metastasized to his liver. Dr. Chuck Miller is an oncologist, board certified in internal medicine, medical oncology, and hematology. He is a founding member of the Physician Advisory Council for Aid in Dying for the group called Compassion and Choices. Dr. Craig Nakatsuka is a retired physician representing, I don't know how retiring he is, representing Hawaii's Partnership for Appropriate and Compassionate Care. HPAC is a coalition of healthcare, disability rights, advocacy, and educational organizations united in opposition to legalizing physician-assisted death. And Jeanette Kojane has a Master of Public Health degree and is the Executive Director of Kokua Mau, which is comprised of health workers and others specializing in palliative medicine and hospital care. Its purpose is to improve quality of life by promoting excellence in hospice, end-of-life, palliative care, and early advanced care planning. First, John Radcliffe, thank you for joining us under all the circumstances. Tell us a little bit how you got to this point where here you are advocating for this legislation.
Well, thank you, Daryl. It's nice that we're having this discussion, and I know this is a tough subject for everybody to watch and to listen to. Death is never on anybody's fun list of things to do. So I became involved in this well after I was diagnosed. I was diagnosed as you say, in the summer of 2014, and given 6 months to 24 months to live.
So you've got a year on the doctors already.
I'm on house money now, as they say in the trade, and moving forward on that. I've had 43 rounds of chemotherapy, each one of them lasting 3 days. During the pendency of this illness, I've been in the hospital 3 times. I've been in the emergency room 15 times so far. It's been a rough go.
So what brought you, though, to this point where you're thinking about ending your life potentially on your own?
Yes. Here's the situation the way I see it. I've been in a lot of pain. I've had a lot of suffering. I'm going to be in a lot more pain. And I'm going to have a lot more suffering. So I see myself in a situation not unlike, metaphorically at least, those 3,000 people were in the World Trade Center on 9/11. They were just been hit by an airplane that came through the building. The building was on fire, and they had a choice to make. They could do the God-intended thing and wait for the fire to get them, or they could jump. A lot of them, hundreds of them, jumped. I've never seen anybody criticize any of those people for choosing that method of death. I think I have a right to a choice, given my situation. And I think the law is very clear and very specific and will be operated as it has been in the other states that already have it very well.
Jeanette Kojane, as a person who deals frequently in hospice and palliative care, what are the options right now in Hawaii for someone in John's situation when they're really approaching the very end?
Yeah, so first of all, it's called palliative care.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. And you know, you're not the only one who may not have heard of this before or know what it is. So we actually see that there's a lot of misunderstanding about what hospice is and what palliative care is. So, you know, I can't speak to John's situation. I'm not his physician, but I'm happy to talk about some of the options here in Hawaii, because I think that certainly in the last 17 years since Kukuamau has been in existence and working to improve the care that everyone gets in the community, a lot has happened. So a lot of people have heard of hospice care, but they may not be familiar with exactly what it is. So there's misunderstandings.
Let me move you
about
along
that.
a little bit, though.
Sure.
Just under the law right now,
Yeah.
I mean, what would happen if, for example, if John decided, I'm just going to commit suicide myself, or if he did ask a doctor to give him pills that he could use?
Well, I think Dr. Miller would have a better understanding about the legal situation.
That's fine, doctor.
Right now, there have been the last two states' attorney generals have basically put forward their interpretation of Hawaii's statute, that they're interpreting this as it does not give physicians the right to write a prescription for a patient when they request it even, that would end up allowing that patient to end their life. So it's illegal under the current interpretation of Hawaii statutes, and I think that's the point of the legislation we're trying to pass, is that I think it's a very narrow interpretation of, because I've read those things.
So a doctor that would do that, what would happen to them?
Now?
Well, right now, I could be prosecuted. I could
Felony.
be indicted and prosecuted. So,
Dr. Nakatsuka, I know you oppose this kind of legislation, but can you give me a sense of what your interpretation is the current status? I mean, are there people that really want to end their lives but are not able to? And do you feel like this is an important issue to address?
Well, we wouldn't even have bills being put in if it was legal. I mean, why would you have bills? So yes, right now it is illegal.
And it's illegal for the patient or the family, or, you know, what kind of options are there? If someone wanted to end their life, is there no legal way to do it?
go ahead.
Someone can, of course, commit suicide legally, but as far as putting the doctor in the middle with the express intent of ending their lives, that's not legal.
Okay, John, I
I
know you wanted to
take
pitch
a
in
look
here.
at that,
Yeah.
at the phraseology on that and so forth, because as you said, a lot of this has to do with the way you look at the issue. And the real question is, and what the bill has to do with, is whether or not I, or a person like myself, an adult of sound mind, knowing that death is certain and has less than 6 months to live, can make an informed decision to ask for and receive a life-ending prescription from my doctor without my doctor going to jail.
So that's the language
essentially
that's in this,
Yeah.
this Bill 201.
That's right.
House Bill 201.
Yeah, that's right.
Let me get back to you, Jeanette Kojane, because I know I cut you off on there. You know, I got a question from a viewer here, and you know, how can you predict how long a person has to live? You know, John just told us he's lived already a year past what
Well,
was
not a
expected.
year, but we're working on a
Working
year.
on a year. What's going on with people and their families at that stage of their life when they really don't know, they're really afraid? What's going through these families?
Well, you know, a diagnosis of serious illness obviously can turn a family upside down. That's horrible news, and any of us who have gotten those phone calls know that your whole life changes. for us, what we see with hospice and palliative care is that there is a choice beyond, horrible suffering and ending your life. So there are two choices, but I think there's also the third choice. And that, good news, there's a third choice, which is hospice and palliative care, which has been shown to be very effective at relieving the suffering that people have. So as I was saying, for us, we see that a lot of people don't understand what hospice is. They don't understand the wide range of support that can come, comes into people's home, and it really helps to relieve the suffering, physical suffering, certainly. People are, hospice is well known for the pain and symptom management, but also the emotional and spiritual and social suffering that people feel. And so I think it's important to talk about the team approach that hospice has, which is then that, everyone comes with their professional expertise to help the person who's sick as well as their loved ones. So I think of it as a team approach.
I'd like to say something since the question was on prognosis. First of all, I am a doctor that spent the last decade of my practice. I have retired, but I spent the last decade of my practice dealing with patients who have advanced illness and end-of-life care. And trying to go into those consults with a prognosis, it's actually a moving target. With the dramatic new therapies, checkpoint inhibitors, immunotherapies, etc., it's a moving target. It truly has been very dramatic in the oncologic field. It's not just Jimmy Carter who dramatically got better. Many others have. So prognosis, indeed, as that question has been stated, is very hard to make many times. It is a moving target.
Okay, Dr. Miller, you wanted to say something?
I agree with Dr. Knox, with Craig. The biggest point, I think, is in order for a patient to be considered eligible for hospice, and hospice is the gold standard for end-of-life care, absolutely. But you at least have to have one physician who believes that, okay, my patient has less than 6 months to live. And then they can enter into hospice, palliative care, or if they haven't been on palliative care before. But I did want to make the one point about, all of the other states where death with dignity or aid in dying has become legal. That's an option that has been actively integrated into the hospice system. In California, I know, talking to oncologists and nurses in the northern part of the state in Kaiser, it's integrated into the whole system. It's a team effort, like Janine said.
Can I mean,
for end-of-life
Doctor,
care.
but just I want to make sure that we don't lose this train of thought. I think that even with all of these wonderful teams in hospice, even with the advances in medical science, do you still see patients who suffer terribly at the end of their life that you would suspect would choose this option?
Yes.
And what's that
Absolutely.
like?
Want me to tell you?
Let the doctor go first.
John?
Well, John has already been very eloquent about that. I got that. But,
John,
yeah.
I think, better than anybody else in this room, can describe the mental anguish and anxiety of simply knowing that, you know what, I'm going to die, and there's not a blessed thing I can do about it. But what my experience has been with cancer patients as they approach the end of their lives, for most patients, frankly, and I agree with this, for most patients, palliative care and hospice can be enough, okay? And that meets the needs of the patient and their family, but not for everyone. If it did, we wouldn't have 80% of voters in this state supporting the concept of aid in dying. So what am I to do as a physician if someone asks me that? I either have to.
I think Dr. Nakatsuka is trying to get in. Go ahead.
Okay.
So, as much as we want to give autonomy and honor choice, for the work that I do, I really do see it as putting the larger group of the vulnerable elderly, chronically and mentally ill, at risk for harm. I do this work. Everyone at a moment of despair feels like they want to end their lives because they feel like there will be a burden on others. They really fear that it will be a journey of suffering. And there really is going to be a period of despair. And that is what Jeanette was referring to, is that when there is a request like that, I go in with a team to really explore the why. This is more than a medical scope. This is the existential, psychological, social, spiritual arenas for which is beyond the scope of a doctor, and the doctor should not be the primary agent in the middle of this.
Let me ask this. This is a question directly to you, Dr. Nakatsuka. For opponents of hastened death, at what level of pain and suffering would you change your position and say enough?
First of all, I think a lot of, if not all, pain can be controlled. And the first thing I go in there is really to try and control symptoms. That's why it's really something that takes a skill and expertise to do that. So as far as going to the question of enough is enough, it's really working on those symptoms first.
John, I know you've been anxiously waiting for another chance to talk.
Well, yeah, I think so. You asked me why I got into this and so forth, and a lot of it has to do with, people coming up to me and telling me about situations that they have to do with, that they've been dealing with all of their adult lives or something, or at least for the last 20, 25 years. I've had people call me up who said they've been feeling guilty for 25 years because mom asked them to help them out and die, and they refuse to do it, and they still can't cry. They still cry themselves to sleep at night and that sort of thing. So I got involved in it because then afterwards I started hearing from all these folks who said, we really got to watch out for the elderly and take care of those poor old folks because, they're practically helpless and they can hardly get along. You have to drive them everywhere, take them around and do all that stuff for them. And I'm looking at people that say that and I say, I'm 75 years old. Wait a minute here, you're talking about me. And virtually everybody else I know, as a matter of fact. So that group of people, I think us elderly know a lot more than people think we do, and I think we can handle ourselves as we want to. Now, all I'm asking for here is an opportunity for my doctor not to go to jail, if he gives me a prescription for a life-ending prescription. That's it.
But that comment of really that's how people are calling you to say, look at how the elderly are, helpless, they're walking around in wheelchairs and stuff. That's really a devaluation of personhood. There are a lot of elderly, there are a lot of disabled who say that I am still valued. I do not see myself as helpless. I don't see myself as disabled.
That's my point, Doc. That was my point. That's why I got into this.
Good for you.
Okay, let me go back to Kojane. Dr. Nakatsuka brought up the spiritual question. Mm-hmm. How much of a role is that, and do people who go into this process with faith in place have an easier time with the process than people who don't?
That's an interesting question for a few hours. I think every person is different. Every family has their own culture, their own approach to it. And personally, I see over and over again how important it is in hospice care and in palliative care to be including that spiritual aspect for that. And so just to clarify, palliative care is a field of medicine. So hospice is a kind of palliative care, but the good thing about palliative care is, for instance, John could be taking advantage of palliative care because you can be Please do. I have some great recommendations for you. So palliative care, you can get palliative care at the same time as you get curative treatments. So you can still do chemotherapy, but yet the team will come to help manage the suffering. And I actually, also, I talk regularly with people who feel like Dr. Nakatsuka that pain really can be managed, but the spiritual aspect is very important. And I think back on one case study that we did where somebody was really suffering incredible pain. The doctors couldn't get it under control. They tried different things. They had a visit from the chaplain, who wasn't necessarily of the same faith tradition, but they had a good session where there was a dialogue and someone listened. And all of a sudden, they didn't need pain medication anymore. It was a stunning, chicken skin kind of moment. So I think that the spiritual aspect, not to be underestimated, and any of us who've gone through this with our loved ones, we also know how important that is. And people's, is God punishing me? What have I done? Where am I going? These are important questions, which is why it's so great that in our world, we have not only chaplains, but well-trained people to listen. And I will put out a call, really, people need to listen more to what people are going through. And I think that's a really important part of this process. And we need to figure out what solutions are we creating? We are looking at how do we create a whole community where people are well cared for at the end of their life.
Just add to that we're well taken care of in those arenas. I've had the best possible care from the Kaiser people. It's a team operation. It's just, everything is just wonderful from that standpoint. There's no question about it.
Okay, I want to go through we're getting quite a number of questions, and I want to, for Dr. Miller, you could use this as a platform to say whatever else you want to say from the prior conversation, but for the physicians, how do they justify taking life when it goes against their oath? I know that's a common question, but is it against a physician's oath to do what is being suggested here, aid in dying?
I suppose some physicians believe that. Let me just say one thing. There's not a single medical school in this country that uses the Hippocratic Oath. I graduated in 1970, and we didn't use it back then. We took the Oath of Geneva, but that's not the point. The medical ethics goes more to primum non nocere. That's the Latin for first do no harm. And myself and I think a growing number of physicians believe that doing no harm means respecting the patient's individual wishes and rights. And I look at that as my duty. If I don't support my patient, I am doing harm. It's my duty to support, especially to support his wishes at the end of his life. And I think, that's all we're asking in all of these bills. It's not, no one has to participate in this. If it's doesn't meet their moral standards, that's not anything to do with that. It's just for the individual who wishes this, he should have that right.
Dr. Nakatsuka, your
and
answer on
under that whole context of doing no harm, because of the work I do, that's why I am so concerned that this could be harmful for a much greater group. Like, for instance, what if someone is depressed? In Oregon, it is touted that the safeguards are foolproof, 100% foolproof, no abuse. We know that the at least moderate depression rate, and this is moderate, not even mild, for people with chronic advanced illness is at least 25%. According to the best data that we have out of Oregon in the end of 2015, of the 218 prescriptions that were written, how many were referred? Just 5. When there is at least a 25% incidence of depression for people with a chronically ill and only 5 were referred,
Referred to what?
to a mental health practitioner. It tells me not that that program is such a major deterrent for abuse. It just tells me how loose the safety net is.
Let me go to.
What would you think of a spider web that does not catch any flies?
Okay, let me this getting a couple of questions now into sort of the heart of this concern that you're raising here, and it's the issue of people feeling a burden, people that this will somehow be used to cut the costs of medical care because people will die before they get too expensive, I guess is the. What is the position of the medical insurance companies on this issue is one question. Another one, caller thinks the position of hospice administrators is influenced by the high amount of money they can charge. I guess suggesting that you keep them alive longer, then that you get to make more money. These are the viewers calling. I'm not. This is not my opinions. For Dr. Nakatsuka, with the rising cost of healthcare, how do insurance companies feel about this? Again, so
There are reports in Oregon as far as Medicaid and even in California where chemotherapy drugs were rejected and the person had on the letter that they were offered these lethal drugs because, of course, they were cheaper. So therefore, with the rising health costs, of course there would be concern of that happening.
Wait a
minute.
Let me just respond to that.
Yeah, Dr. Miller, please.
Because the cases that I'm familiar with where chemotherapy drugs were turned down by Medicare specifically, and I think whatever California's equivalent of Medicaid is, they were turned down because they were in clinical trials. They were not FDA approved yet. That's the situation that I think Dr. Nakatsuka is referring to. And no, the law has since changed. Medicare will support clinical trials now. But there was a point when it didn't.
Rejection always has been going on. Obviously, the medical insurance companies have a fiduciary responsibility that if indeed it's third or fourth line chemotherapy that is unlikely to work, of course, that has been going on all along. But to add in the same letter the option of lethal drugs and the lower costs, that is where there is a problem. And in fact, that is why California saw that and adjusted the statute.
Okay, John, I know you wanted to get in on that question.
Well, what I'm saying about that is I've listened to both the arguments he made about the statistics, which I think he's arguing about two different things. On the statistics having to do with the entire class on the one hand, and then some individuals, 200 and some, in another. Those are two different things. That doesn't mean 25% of that class is somehow depressed, because it's a whole different operation. And secondly, as a real rabble-rouser, somebody who's been doing it for a long time, I got to tell you, Doc, some of your stuff here seems to me to be kind of causing or trying to get people to get all worked up about this, and I don't want them to get all worked up about this.
Dr. Miller?
I think one thing that maybe Craig doesn't realize is the reason there were only 5 out of 212 prescriptions referred patients who
218.
218, whatever. But there were only 5 referred for mental health evaluation. What isn't in that statistic is all of the people who did a request for medical aid in dying, and their primary physician or their primary oncologist said, no, you don't qualify because you don't have the capacity to do that. And those statistics are not kept.
You know, let me step back a bit, because I think that you folks are very involved in this issue. You know statistics. You've burrowed into them. Let me just ask this question. We promised to talk about this. From a broad picture, what has been the experience in other states? And, have there been situations where, for example, I'm getting a couple of questions here from people who say, if my daughter is depressed and asks for a fatal prescription, would she be served? No. What's the difference between assisted suicide and someone pulling the plug? I mean, we're getting a lot of questions about people who are concerned about abuse. So has this law done well in other states, or has it been heavily used or barely used, Doctor?
It's between Oregon and Washington, we have over 30 years of data and experience from I don't know how many hundreds of physicians. There has never been a documented case of abuse. There's never been a documented, and I think the reason there isn't documented abuse, because physicians do the right thing. 99.9% of doctors want to do the right thing. They're not going to do something bad to hurt their patients.
Dr. Nakatsuka.
The answer, Daryl, is we simply don't know. For all we know, Chuck may be right, that actually that every single one of them was appropriate. But as he also mentioned earlier, nobody is allowed to look at the records. It's gone after a year. It's only within the Department of Health, so we simply don't know. And like if we're concerned about elder abuse, which runs 10%, and you know, in the hospital, the Joint Commission states that we should have peer review, we should have quality control and investigations. That is what is felt to be the optimum practice of medicine. This is just the opposite. This is totally opaque. Nobody can get into the records to know.
John, you're thinking about it. Have you looked at what's going on in other states?
Sure, and it's, you know, it's just as we indicated, there's nothing on the record which indicates. Now, again, we don't know, but we don't know.
Well, and actually, you know, in preparation for today, I will say that I've been trying to do my homework, and I talked to the head of.
Well, everybody here has done a lot of homework.
Yes, and that was not the implication. It was more that I checked with the head of the Oregon and Washington Hospice and Palliative Care Organization to ask some of these questions, because we also are asking these questions, trying to figure out the data. And she said two things. First of all, we are not asking all the questions we would like to be asking. So she also felt that there was definitely a gap in terms of the questions and the data that was being collected. And I did ask her as well, what impact do you see of this? Because they have quite high hospice and palliative care usage in Oregon and in Washington. And they have quite a lot of widespread conversations in the community.
Let me interrupt. When you say high usage, what does that mean?
A lot of people would be using hospice care.
A larger proportion than, say, in Hawaii?
Than in Hawaii, yes. So
why is that?
right, and that's what so part of the question, of course, is why is one state different? And one of the things that's interesting about Oregon is that they had very high usage of hospice before this bill came. So I said, have you seen any increase because of this bill? And she thought it was kind of a strange question and said, no. Our hospice use has been high. It really hasn't gone up. Palliative care has been high. It's higher in Washington than in Oregon. But she didn't see that this bill was making any kind of really a big impact. And they also have a lot of conversations in the community, which is really our goal in Hawaii, is to increase conversations. And I think we can all agree on that those are conversations that aren't happening. So, you know, it's important to say that those things are happening, but it's not necessarily connected to those bills. So that's, I think it's an important point to make.
I guess the question that I would have is it being used so much? I mean, people do have raw numbers of how often it's used, right?
Yeah, it's clear records on all of that stuff. We have all those records, and it's not used very much.
It's not used very
Like
much.
when we said not very much.
It's when I say
15,
very
20,
much, I mean like in
300, 400.
Washington and Oregon, we're talking, if you look at the year-to-year stuff, we're talking 17, 26, 70, that sort of thing. And numbers 116. We're talking those kind of numbers in a population of 4.5 million.
So Dr. Nakatsuka, does that give you any comfort, those low numbers?
One, I agree that they're low, but I must have to say again, according to the best public data that we have, let's say of the two most experienced states, the larger number, Washington and Oregon, John is correct, I agree with him, but I must say there was a 25% jump from 2014 to 2015. And at 218 prescriptions in Oregon in 2015 from 1998, Washington just had that legalized in 2009, and they're already up in the 200s. I'm just stating facts from what's public record, that's all.
I'm glad to have facts. And Dr. Miller, let me start talking about the proposals that are now at the legislature. And this is a question from a viewer. What are the safeguards, if any, in the proposed HB 201? And we can talk generally about the safeguards, but that's the bill that's being put forward as the preferred bill of your organization.
Well,
will there be any possibility of elder abuse? What if your children pressure you to take the pill? So what are the safeguards that are there? I know it's a very long definition of who could use it. I know that much.
Okay, the safeguards in that House bill are basically very similar to the ones in all of the other states where it's legal: Oregon, Washington, California, and I guess Vermont now also. But the safeguards are: the patient has to request personally a prescription, the medication to end their life, and they have to do it, in Oregon, they have to do it in writing as well.
In their own hand?
I believe so.
Yeah.
Yeah, in Oregon. That's
No, I mean,
always- there's hoops all over the place.
somebody could put a piece of paper in front of me.
No. There's hoops all over on this stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, it's like, look here, come on. I mean, can you make this a little bit easier? I mean, no.
Well, that's kind of what I was going to ask next.
Yeah.
But go ahead
Well,
with what is in the bill
okay,
specifically.
and then the physician has to counsel the patient on other options, including exactly all the other things we've been talking about: hospice, palliative care, voluntary stopping eating and drinking, terminal sedation. All of these are legal options in virtually every state in the union.
What's terminal sedation?
Terminal sedation is basically the concept that frankly, many oncologists use to help control severe suffering in their cancer patients at the end of life. It's basically increasing the dosage of pain medication to the point that the patient becomes unconscious and eventually stops breathing.
So what's the difference between that and what we're talking about?
Well, that's a good question, because to me, and I've done this. I've done this, I don't know how many times, but many, many times. To me, if I give a patient terminal sedation, if I provide them with that, that's medical aid in dying. That's exactly what we want to achieve. The difference is I've got to control it. The patient doesn't have any control over terminal sedation. In our bill, and if I can write him a prescription, the patient maintains autonomy, and he makes the decision when, where, and how to end his life.
Dr. Nakazuka, I know you wanted to. Do you think these safeguards actually can be
Well,
enough?
I want to actually add to what this whole description of terminal sedation. The big ethical difference between terminal sedation, now I do end-of-life care and I've used terminal sedation very, very rarely, and the reason why is the intent. The intent behind terminal sedation is to do everything you can to control suffering. And if you cannot control suffering with steadily escalating meds, that you have to continue to do that and you risk the person's death and the person dies. They have died, but the primary focus was the intent to control suffering. When someone writes a prescription for lethal drugs for a patient, that is not with a primary intent to control suffering. It may be psychological comfort for that person, just like the World War II spies carried a bottle of cyanide with them, but it's not for the primary purpose of trying to control suffering. It is for killing.
Okay, John.
This is precisely where I beg to differ with the doctor. This is about pain and suffering. And this is about end-of-life anxiety and all of that stuff that goes with it. Now, and depression and all of those things, including all the pain and the suffering and the diarrhea and the vomiting and all that massive stuff that goes on. But so this is where we differ about that. This is my decision. It's not your decision.
Jeanette, as a neutral party, what do you think about this diarrhea and the control of distressing symptoms as a neutral party? Could you comment on that?
You know, what I wanted to say was that what I see all the time, so one of our programs is to go out into the community. We have a Let's Talk Story program where we go out to talk with people because we know this is a difficult conversation. And I find that there's a lot of misunderstanding and anticipatory suffering, that people are worried about what's going to come. And by getting good information, and maybe not, and from us as well as talking with their providers, they can understand what's available. And you know, we don't know what we don't know. And my goodness, we were talking about supporting family caregivers. There's so much need right now, and there are people who are suffering, and they want to find out what's available. And I think that there's, you know, a lot of people don't know what's available, and of course they're worried because they don't see what's out there. And again, I can see from my side, from the hospice side, from palliative care, that people's symptoms are very well managed, that people are very well cared for. Another statistic I looked up in the family satisfaction with hospice care is 92.5%. So these are people where their loved one died, but yet the family felt that they were well supported and they were well cared for. So I think that
Has to happen. Yeah.
But I think that there's a lot of more information. Like in our Let's Talk Story program, we're out where our tagline is people work, live, and pray. So we do talks, churches and temples and workplaces. People feel so relieved from learning about what the options are, as well as those conversations.
I need to pick us up to, you know, we brought up this question about choice versus who's telling who what they can do. You brought this up, and we have questions coming in about that. Why is it okay for some people to inflict their religious beliefs on us when it's our bodies that are being terminated? Another question along those lines, what is the difference between assisted suicide and someone pulling the plug on someone on life support? Dr. Miller, I'd like you to start on that. I mean, is this primarily, in your mind, a religious debate?
I think whether you want to call it religion or differences in or perceptions of morality, I think that's the primary difference. Because, individuals have different beliefs and faiths. And I have always felt since when I first became an oncologist, I saw so many patients, they reach a point where medicine, more treatment doesn't work, it does more harm than good. And I became an advocate early on in my career to help support patients' choice for end of life. And it's not my choice, it should be their choice. So,
Dr. Nakatsuka, I mean, how much does your own faith and the faith of the people who are involved with the organizations that you're involved with, how much does that drive their opinion on this?
First, I want to educate the religious right, and that is withdrawal of artificial life support is not considered euthanasia, for which many of them feel that is. It is not euthanasia. I don't think this is a religious issue. Dr. Ara Bayok, one of the founding fathers for the hospice concept in Hawaii and a national leading authority on hospice, Dr. Dan Fishberg, a palliative care physician and the foremost authority of palliative care here in the state, are both social progressives. This is not an ethical issue of the religious right. This is an ethics issue, period.
John,
May be an ethics issue, period, but it's being driven by the religious right. And it's being driven specifically by the First Assembly of God Church, and to some degree, and I expect a lot more, from the Catholic Church coming up. Good news on that from my perspective is that recent polling, even polling we've done for a long time, indicates that the rank and file members of those religions are not necessarily with the leadership of the religion. This comes down from the Family Forum out of Colorado Springs, Colorado. It's all part of a national network of right-wing religious folks.
Can I just be clear that people that are doing hospice and palliative care, people who are caring for people in our community, the Kukuamau network of people, we are not doing this for religious reasons. So
Understood.
I want to make a distinction here that the people that I work with are professionals, well-trained, who are working on improving care for
No, I get that.
everyone.
I think what
I
we're
get
talking
that.
about, we're talking a little bit
We're
now
fine
about
with
the
that.
politics.
I just want to make
We're
sure
fine
that
with
that
that.
is clear, that that's not what we're talking about.
I get that, and I want to make. I want to follow up with you, John. Is that you've seen through a lot of these issues at the legislature as a professional lobbyist, one of the better ones. Have you? Well, you and I have been familiar with each other for a long time. What is the political fight? What's the political battle? What you talk about? That's where the pressure's coming from. Are legislators influenced by that? I mean, is that why we don't have
Absolutely.
this here?
Yes,
and how do you
absolutely.
overcome that? How does that get overcome?
Frankly, you overcome that by trying harder. I mean, working better than you did in the past. I'd never worked on this issue in the past. Never thought much about it, other than, it's nice. I'd be in favor of it, but I didn't, put my shoulder to the wheel as I am now on this. I think it's the right thing to do.
You haven't really done that much work on social issues, right? I mean,
I'm a professional lobbyist. I work for all of those. In fact, what's interesting about this is that I'm being opposed by basically the same people that generally oppose me on most of the things that I lobby for. In the past, I lobby for gambling.
Smoking.
The same people are against, and liquor and tobacco and things like that.
you got to write that book. I do need to go on.
By the way, on the
go
whole
ahead.
issue of ethics, I do want to say that I don't know John, but from what I heard from the legislators, he is really a man of his word, and he follows through on what he says. And under medical ethics, there actually is a term for that, and it's called fidelity, doing as you said you would. And John is an embodiment of fidelity.
Well, God bless you.
Let me.
I wanted to just bring up a point. One of the concerns that we have on the patient safety side of this is how well trained are people in having these conversations. And I will tell you, in my world, communication is one of the most important procedures that providers learn, and they have to practice. So from our, Kukuamau is very concerned about how are we having high quality, values, neutral decisions where people are spelling out all the options. That's really going to take a lot of training of people. At the moment, we want our providers to do that around advanced care planning, and we see some gaps there. So I think that this is, moving forward with this, it's really important to make sure that the providers are well trained in having that.
Yeah, you can ask.
I can answer that.
Oh, good.
I have. There was a survey that went out.
Yeah.
So in California, just relatively recently, now of course California has legalized physician-assisted suicide since June, but a survey went out not because of that. Just for what Jeanette said, is they surveyed 700 primary care providers, including nurse practitioners, and asked them what do they think about having conversations regarding people with advanced illness and end of life. 75% of the providers felt that it was their responsibility to do that. However, less than half had actually done that, and astonishingly, less than 1/3 had been trained in that.
Dr. Bill, go ahead. I wanted also, though, to broaden out that question, because we did get a viewer question: how well are doctors trained in not just dealing with assisted suicide? This was specific about dealing with suicide medication, but in terms of this conversation that needs to happen, hopefully before someone has got a terminal illness.
I think, unfortunately, there's not good training. I can use the example from California because I've been intimately going back and forth with the Kaiser folks at Northern California. They actually put together, because they knew this bill was coming, they actually put together an integrated training program in the Kaiser system for not just oncologists, but basically for all of their docs to get training in discussing these options
That's
for
good.
end of life. And that's absolutely, I agree totally with Craig and Jeanette. That's absolutely critical. So that's education, and that bill requires that sort of discussion. I think we need to educate docs more to get it absolutely right.
Let me ask.
Chuck, that is for, we all have agreed on that. That is for the comfort level of general end-of-life conversations. But when we're talking about a request for oral lethal drugs, and as I said, it's really, you got to assess for depression, you've got to assess the emotional state, spiritual state, etc. What tools do you use for doing that? Are you familiar with the PHQ-2, PHQ-9, geriatric depression scale, maybe the FICA tool? For
Okay, we're not going to. This is going to get too technical because
Okay,
we've
sorry.
only got about 5. It's all right. But I want to make sure we keep honoring our viewers with their questions, and I think this is an important question to a lot of people. If physician-assisted suicide is legalized, would a person who does not make their end-of-life wishes known before they become incompetent, would physician-assisted suicide be forced upon these individuals? And I think that the answer is no under this law, but is there potential that when people do enter this state, how do you deal with that? I mean, if doctors...
I mean, if they're mentally incompetent?
If they are not able to communicate with you?
Well, if okay, the bill specifically says the patient has to request personally the medication. So if they can't, if they can't do that, it's a moot point. It can't occur.
So getting back to the issue about if someone is, we talked about this before, the removal of life support, for example. I mean, does that only happen when someone is really unable to sustain themselves at all?
I think you got to make the distinction, okay, between if you have a patient who is on life support and is incompetent, hopefully they already did an advance directive. When they're incompetent, there is a tool called the Durable Power of Attorney for Health Care or Health Affairs, and it appoints someone to make health care decisions for them in case they become incompetent. And it then becomes that person's responsibility to make that decision. But that's not, as Craig said earlier, that's not euthanasia, that's not suicide, that's not anything. That is simply stopping life support treatment.
Yes.
I think that one thing that everyone here agrees upon is that these kind of conversations are best happening before they have to happen, right? And so we've only got a couple of minutes left, and John, I hate to use the term last word, but we've got a number of just direct questions directly to you. First, for John Radcliffe, has he ever considered moving to Oregon or Washington?
No,
No? Why is it so important that you have this happen here?
I live here.
And
This is my state. I've been a part of this state for most of my adult life, and I love this place, and I am here.
I imagine this is where you want to end your life.
Fair enough.
And another question, Dave from Moili. John, you will be a Badger forever.
Exactly right.
Go Badgers.
And
Go
so,
Packers. All right. Well, not anymore.
what are the next, in terms of the politics of this, how do you see it playing out? I'm really curious.
Well, I think it's going to be an issue that legislators don't particularly want to address. It's not a fun thing to address. It pits people against each other. It's just not fun. But I think they are going to address it. And I believe that we are going to be able to debate this issue. And I believe that the point of view that I represent will win. And I say that only because I will work very hard. And I know that hundreds and hundreds of other people will work very hard. And I know most of the legislators. I know many of their mothers and fathers and
Their
so
children.
forth, and their children. And
You're
I will be
honest.
talking to them as well.
And, So you're confident this is going to happen? You're talking about this being a conversation.
I'm not confident of anything of a bill actually passing the legislature, although I think it will. I'm not going to, make a prediction that it's going to pass or not. I'm going to tell you, and I'm going to tell your
Very quickly.
watchers that I want to work as hard as I can.
I hate to rush you. Anyway, thank you very much, all of you. It's been a great panel, very interesting, a lot of participation.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Before we go tonight, we want to give an update on information that just came out from the Hawaii Tourism Authority, and that's because this supports a conversation we had 3 weeks ago with representatives from DLNR, Haleakala National Park, and the Hawaii Tourism Authority. Soaring visitor counts appear to be taking an environmental toll on our parks and other places, and social media drives a lot of those visitors to many places that are not safe. So we have to look at some of these new numbers from HTA. The statewide visitor count was $8.94 million people last year. That's up 3%. And that was a record-setting year. Also, the amount per island went up on every island. And I'm trying to find those numbers now. Oahu went up 5.6 million. Hawaii Island went up 1.55 million. Maui soared to 2.6 million. Kauai grew to 1.2 million visitors. And of course, total visitor spending was added 1.82 billion in state tax revenue. So if it felt a bit crowded, that's why. We'll continue to follow this story and find out what's being done to address the impact of our success in tourism on our islands. Coming up next week, Mark Zuckerberg's lawsuit to force the sale of Kama'aina lands may have been withdrawn, but it reminds us that land acquisition through quiet title is still a huge issue for local families who have inherited ownership of family lands. Are Native Hawaiians continuing to be alienated from their traditional lands? Join us next time for Quiet Title on Insights, right here on PBS Hawaii. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.